Okay, the last video for chapter 1. I hope you folks have gotten some material of value from the previous videos. They will be used in assignments. And, if you have any questions, just ask me. I've repeated this before, and I want this to sink in that we have one due date for assignments and tests and quizzes. That is 10/10. The reasons for that is it is somewhat self-paced. You can work ahead, and it will eliminate anyone finding it necessary to open up any of the material because they've had this length of time to complete it. Great way to go, folks. Great way to go. All right. We talked about the fumigation of the vagina to lure the uterus in position. Don't know the fumigant. Some other forms of therapy that we have. Music therapy. I think these are good. I think these are legit forms of therapy. Aroma, we've talked about that. Art. Certainly art is really an interesting way to go, particularly with children, and it might even expand into adults also. But many times children will be a victim, and they are told by an adult, now don't you say anything to anybody about what has happened. And they really impress that on the child. I'll cut your ears off if you do, or cut your nose off if you do. So they really want to impress that on the child. Okay, woo, don't want my nose cut off. Don't want my ears cut off. So I won't tell a person. But when it comes to art therapy, they say and think to themselves, well, I'm not telling anyone. But they didn't say anything about drawing a picture of what took place. So that is one really positive aspect about art therapy. And there's some very interesting findings in art therapy. It's very powerful. It's very revealing. And I really encourage anyone who's going into the area of therapeutic approach, or in education, is to kind of at least look at some very fundamental aspects of art therapy. Now, having said that, be very careful that we don't use this as a tool, and this is what I emphasize. We need different tools to work with. I mean, if we're going to build a box, we need a hammer and maybe a crowbar, other bars, maybe a level and a measure and that type of thing. As opposed to therapy, if an individual is given one tool, and we'll say that that one tool is a hammer, then they'll walk around looking at various aspects, and everything will appear to them to be a nail, and whack with the hammer. So we need more tools. We need measures, leveling devices, and then that's what I emphasize here in the therapies, particularly the genital therapies. Okay, laxative at one time was used as a therapy. Tobacco, the first use of tobacco, it would make people ill and they would vomit and they would thought there was some type of cleansing taking place. Now in the dungeons, and this was terrible, the mentally ill, they would tie them up in such a way that the individuals couldn't lay down. They had a straw mat there that they kind of leaned on, but they never cleaned the dungeons out. I mean, they were sentenced to a lifetime of filth. That's the way the mentally handicapped, mentally impaired individuals were treated at one time. And certainly, we've come a long way since then. But they would put them in there, and that would be their sentence for life. And then we have the moral therapy, and that kind of drew them out of that situation. But then, as you saw in Willowbrook, there was another situation that went on. Now, if you can imagine Willowbrook, and we saw the horrible conditions that existed at Willowbrook, Now take those individuals and bind them by their hands so they couldn't lie down, put them in a holding cell, never clean the waste, and it will give you kind of an idea. I mean, we say, well, I can imagine what that would be like. I can't. My mind can go there, but I really can't imagine the full implications. Okay, continuing on. Amulets, it's a small object to ward off evil spirits. Remember that we still have evil spirits as a sign of mental illness or the evil spirit resulting in mental illness. St. John's wort, probably aware of that today. Salem and sanctuary. Now here's a term that you probably have heard, bedlam, which means uproar, confusion, madhouse, everybody going here or there. Well, this may have very well have originated from St. Mary of Bethlehem in England, which admitted the mentally ill. Then we have the gyrating chair. This was kind of interesting. There was a cap put on their head, and the chair was spun real fast. If you kind of want an idea of what that's like, and I suppose most of you can relate to this at one time or another, you may have been in a swivel-type chair and someone would spin it real fast. Well, these gyrating chairs went very, very, very rapidly. And you can imagine how that made the individuals feel who were sitting in the chairs. Rocks in your head. This was kind of interesting because they'd have a sham man, an individual. If you had a problem, you see the sham man, and the sham man would supposedly make an incision in your head, and the sham man had a helper with them, and this helper had a handful of rocks, and when the incision was made in the skull, the sham man was handed some rocks, and it appeared as though he took them out of the individual's mind or individual's brain, and he would show them then to his patients. It very well could be. You hear the phrase on occasion, maybe not that frequently, but a person does hear the phrase. I imagine you've heard it. Oh, they have rocks in their head, and that may very well have been where it comes from. Franz Mesmer with mesmerism. This involved a type of gravitational pull. He had a large round tub filled with water, and individuals would be able to sit in that large tub, and he would walk around and touch them with a stick, supposedly to get the polarization of these individuals. Well, one comment on this was, after a while, the only individuals that were attending this were young women who would strip down and sit in that tub, and then Mesmer would go around and touch the young women, and so evidently after a while it went by the wayside. Electroconvulsive therapy, that started with insulin. In other words, what they really looked at is that two disorders like schizophrenia and maybe seizures do not exist at the same time. So if we can shock that individual, getting rid of one disorder, maybe the other disorder won't survive or be as severe. And so that was kind of the background for the shocks. They were insulin shocks, and then they were changed to electrical shock. We had lobotomies, started in about 35, taking an ice pick and going up under the eyelid, and of course you get the ice pick. I think it was about a regular ice pick. You get the ice pick up there and take a hammer and little tap, little tap, little tap, right through the skull. Then once you got through the skull, you take the ice pick and just much up the person's brain. And there was kind of some questionable results from that, and it started about 1935 in Portugal, and it continued here when it started in the United States. I believe it continued into the 50s. I don't know, maybe there's still some individuals that's doing it today. Psychopharmacology, pills were introduced. Individuals had stress then. This was in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Before that, bridges were stressed. when the bridge was ready to collapse or the bridge was getting old, we could say the bridge was stressed. Well, now the term stressed, or at this time in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the word stress became more associated with individuals, with humans. And so they found a pill. And so this was a form of therapy, and we're still using this today. Prozac, Zoloft, Amion. We have different types of pills for different types of concerns. A therapist I want to talk to you about a little bit, just mentioned Carl Rogers. He believed in the client-centered approach. Right now, a very popular therapy is cognitive behavioral therapy, where we use both the thinking aspect and the behavioral aspect, as Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner developed the behavioral approach. And then we have brief therapy. Like it says, brief therapy was short, doesn't last very long. They get right to the point. And you see there the Rosenhan experiment. I'm going to be visiting with you in another chapter concerning the Rosenhan experiment, because I really do find it interesting. This concludes chapter 1. You've checked your dates. You know what you're doing. You're planning ahead. You are ready to submit basically one chapter a week and complete that. If you go ahead and you work ahead, that's great. There's no problem with that, because as I stated before, there's no deductions for turning material in early. Just don't get behind. Procrastination has no place. Okay. So until we reach chapter 2 and visit about chapter 2, you folks have a good day.